千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. The name of the story is Pouring Tea. And here is how it goes. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a student of the Tao who visited with the sage. So the student said to the sage, "Master, I am here to learn from you. There are areas of the Tao I do not fully understand." So of course, as you would expect, the sage said he would be more than glad to help. So the two of them sat down over tea to talk. Initially, the sage assumed the student had questions he wished to ask. After all, he said that there were areas of the Tao that he did not fully comprehend. But it soon became apparent that the student was only there to express his views. That is all he did. He expounded on his opinions, covering several topics. And there seemed to be no end to his discourse. So to the sage, the situation started to feel much more like a lecture than a conversation. So the sage said nothing, but he lifted the teapot to serve tea for his guest. He poured hot tea into the student's cup. When it was full, he kept pouring. So the tea overflowed the cup onto the table. Some of it splashed onto the student, who was startled. He jumped back out of his seat and said, "Master, master, please stop pouring. The tea is spilling over." The sage said, "Yes, the teacup is full, so it cannot take any more tea. This is not unlike your mind. It is already full of your opinions. If you do not empty your cup first, how can it receive more tea?" The end. Let's talk about the Tao of this story. So first, the sage is absolutely correct. If one's mind is already full of pre-existing notions, how can it learn anything new? If it's already full of hubris, how can it transcend its limitations? We see this around us with all the people that we know are egocentric in our lives. Their minds are already full of hubris. Therefore, it is basically impossible for them to transcend their current limitations. They cut off the possibility of improvement for themselves. And by the same token, if your mind is full of worries and anxieties, how can you face life with good cheer? If it is full of attachments to the past, how can you create a better future for yourself? And to continue, let's talk about the story specifically, how we can link the metaphors to life. So first of all, the cup receiving tea is the mind learning, receiving new concepts, information, facts, knowledge, and so on. So let me ask everyone, what would it mean to sip from this cup? In the metaphor of Lao Tzu, to sip from the cup is to apply what you have learned, thereby turning it into experience. So think about what's going on when you have a teacup and there's fragrant hot tea being poured into it. If you then start to enjoy the tea, you are experiencing the tea for yourself, not just looking at it. This is equivalent to you learning about something new, like an idea, maybe a Tao principle. That's like receiving the tea into the cup. When you actually sip from it, you are utilizing that principle in your life and seeing, experiencing how it actually works. So let's look at the opposite. What if you don't? If you don't take any tea, you just let the cup sit there, well, you know the hot tea is going to go cold. It's going to become stale. It is no longer the fragrant hot tea that it was in the beginning, given sufficient time, if you don't do anything with it. This is exactly equivalent to somebody learning book knowledge, but then do nothing with it, not actually put it into practice. The book knowledge has a tendency to become increasingly outdated as time goes on. Now, I'm glad to say that the principles of the Tao explained by Lao Tzu, it seems to be fresh because it is timeless. But at the same time, I also know that the knowledge I see in so many other books will become dated after a year or two, especially in the technology field. And that is basically tea that grows cold very quickly. Before I leave this slide, let me say application is crucial in the authentic Tao. And you may find that it's interesting, I need to mention this specifically, but in the West, there are students of the Tao who reject this very notion. They're the ones that approach the Tao from an academic perspective or a purely philosophical mindset. This means they're often trapped in the idea that they only have to think about certain things, like Tao principles. And Tao sages already know just thinking and only thinking will produce no results in the material world. It's just something that happens in your mind, and it's isolated there. So the academic and philosophically oriented people will gravitate to the notion in the Tao that you can do nothing and do everything. Basically, they take a passage in the Tao Te Ching out of context. They magnify it to cover everything. And then they use it as the catch-all excuse for inaction, for passivity. Oh, I don't have to do anything because I can do everything. and nothing happens. This is not just unique to the study of the Tao philosophy, it is part of human nature. We see the same manifestation occur in different ways, in different schools of thought about self-improvement. For instance, if all you do is think positive, but you never take any action, you can be sure the universe will respond in kind. It will reflect the non-action right back to you, which means nothing changes. Now, in Asia, students of the authentic Tao tradition are taught a very different lesson. Thinking is great, but it is only the precursor to action. This is how the authentic masters teach the original philosophy. It also happens to be the way that philosophy is taught here in martial arts dojos in the West. Whenever an authentic master teaches movement, they will also teach Tao philosophy. And when they talk about that, it is always the mindset of action and application, for the simple reason that it works. It's also the reason why people who have experienced that, when they find my books, they resonate with them. They realize that I am coming in from the same source as these masters in the martial arts dojos. So to continue on, continue with the Tao. Let's go to the overflowing cup. A cup overflowing with tea represents an arrogant mind. I think that's easy to see. So the tea spilling onto the table makes quite a mess. Just like in the story, the student jumps back out of his seat to avoid getting splashed. In a real life situation, you see the same thing. An arrogant person expressing his arrogance is like tea spilling over, splashing everybody, and people retreat. People take a step back to avoid getting that on them. So, and this is what the bullet is talking about. In life, an arrogant person tends to make a mess of various situations in any setting, so that when other people perceive the spillover of arrogance, they pull back to avoid or minimize further interactions. And of course, this does not make the arrogant person popular. So for that reason, Lao Tzu emphasizes in this chapter, holding a cup and overfilling it cannot be as good as stopping short. So now we have a different way to look at the same passage from the Tao Te Ching and have it apply to real life situations, have it apply to our interactions with other human beings that we encounter. So the advice from Lao Tzu to us takes the form of three metaphors, and we have covered 2 out of 3. The first one is that we want to hold the cup that is not overfilled, metaphorically speaking. We want to enjoy the tea that has been poured into it, again, metaphorically speaking. So that, and it is important for us to enjoy the tea because it creates more of an opening, more space within the cup to receive more tea, fresh, hot tea. So metaphorically, it is clear what we have to do when it comes to learning about the Tao and applying the Tao to real life. Number 2, the metaphor that we have just talked about is to wield the knife, the blade that is not too sharp, that has not been overly sharpened to the point of brittleness. This is because we want to use the knife, which I'd like to remind everybody, the knife is metaphorical for the mind and the body, we want to use our physical selves, our mental aspects as a tool for the intended purpose. The knife, the blade is a tool. We want to avoid sharpening it too much, which means the mind becomes too harsh, too critical, too negative. And finally, as a preview for next time, the third metaphor that Lao Tzu will use is the room that is full of treasures. Now, of course, typically you and I will think of a room that is full of treasures as a positive thing. In Western culture, that's what we are taught, that we want to accumulate a lot of material possessions. Lao Tzu points out that anything done to excess can be a bad thing, including the accumulation of material things in this room. When you have too much, you begin to worry about some kind of loss, some kind of damage. So the point that we're going to talk about next time and emphasize is that in the Tao, one can acquire wealth without going overboard. And I want to emphasize that because there's any number of spiritual traditions that would actually highlight some sort of a very Spartan existence or poverty as a virtue. Not in the Tao. In the Tao, prosperity is a good thing. Abundance is a good thing. It is to be enjoyed. Life is to be enjoyed. But everything in moderation, we don't want to do any of that in excess. It just makes sense. And then finally, the last bullet there, we want to liberate ourselves from the worry of having too much. And that's because when we possess excessive material things, that is always one of the prices that we must pay. That we become ever more concerned about the possibility of loss. Therefore, we take measures to protect it, and we still have increasing anxiety about losing any or part of it. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.